Good morning, everyone. I want to warmly welcome you to this really important side event today, in which we're focusing on the Global Environment Facility and their new initiative. My name is Mary Warlick. I'm the Deputy Executive Director at the International Energy Agency, and it's really a great pleasure to be here with all of you. As I said, we're here gathered here today to launch the new Global Environment Facility funded Global E-Mobility Program, and I know you're going to be hearing all about it in just a few minutes. This program, as I understand it, aims to accelerate the global transition to electric mobility with low and middle income countries in the driving seat. And this program will be coordinated by UNEP, but with several international organizations, including the IEA, involved to support the around 30 participating countries. We at the IEA are very pleased and excited to take part and contribute with our analysis and expertise on electric vehicle trends and policies for everyone's benefit. We really have an excellent agenda today, but also a tight schedule, so this is why I will immediately hand it over to our first speaker, Mr. Gustavo Alberto Fonseca, Director of Programs, Global Environment Facility. Gustavo, I want to thank you for two things, in particular, obviously, for being here today and taking the time to do so and providing your views on how we can enable this global transition successfully. But I really want to thank you for your leadership and initiative by GEF to support the launch of this specific program on electrical vehicles as a part of your portfolio. We from the IEA, as I said, very much look forward to working with you on the implementation of this work over the next few years. So, Gustavo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, and welcome. Good morning, everybody. As you can see in the screen here, this is an event to discuss how can we accelerate the shift to electric mobility. In switching to zero emissions in transport, the transport sector, we know it's crucial to achieve the targets of the Paris Agreement. And for the transport sector to align with the Paris Agreement, all new vehicles sold by 2035 will need to be electric. So 2035 is just around the corner, so we don't have a lot of time to do this. But without this acceleration, we'll start to miss the opportunity to meet the Paris Agreement. This means that the rate of adoption of electric vehicles will need to increase 12 times in the next decade. It's a daunting challenge compared with current sales rates. Business as usual will lead to doubling of the only see the doubling of the global fleet, and therefore, it's not going to be enough. We've almost at this growth coming from low and middle income countries. We really need to accelerate to 12 times what we've seen as in the business as usual shift to electric mobility. In the GEF, we have done quite a lot on transport and clean transport, particularly on transport-oriented development. For example, in Mexico, we provided early support for the development of fuel cells and also electric hybrids, for example, in Brazil. We invested quite a lot on BRTs in several countries, including Tanzania and Brazil. But looking at the emissions trends, it's clear that we'll need to significantly accelerate the pace of these transformations. I don't know if you know, but today, every day in the COP is dedicated to a particular theme. Today's Transport Day, and at COP26, we are getting unprecedented attention to the role of transport in climate mitigation. We congratulate the UK government for the leadership role it has had so far, and thanks for Nigel for being a champion of the UK in COP26. You've been in the business sector, and now you're in this role, and I think you know what we're talking about today, and I look forward to your statement. So to further accelerate this agenda, we need a global approach that involves the leading countries like the UK, but also low and middle income countries, which is the bread and butter of the GEF. We provide funding to 154 countries every 4 years, and we are now finalizing the replenishment of the GEF trust fund, what we call the 8th replenishment cycle, GEF-8, that will conclude in May of next year, and then we have fresh resources to start addressing this agenda. So only through a global approach we can ensure that there is a global shift to zero emissions and electric mobility. I'm going to finalize here my remarks, but to point out that we need to support two programs and projects that support policy development, especially in developing countries, in low and middle income countries. And it's important that these programs address, number one, the development of national programs, for example, to start introducing and switching to electric buses, and plans for the development of charging stations to reduce range anxiety that we all know exists still. Secondly, these programs must help with financing to overcome the incremental costs, capital costs of electric mobility. Thirdly, we need to support the development of regional and sub-regional approaches because they are important if you're going to be mainstreaming electric mobility. And finally, support the development of country roadmaps and set more ambitious national targets. And this is exactly what we are here today to discuss through the new GEF e-mobility program. It's already supporting and hopefully will expand in the next cycle. And we are working, again, at the global, regional, and national levels to put in place the support structures that will be needed. And we have 27 low and middle income countries already in this program. Some of them are small island developing states, and I know, Nigel, that you've been paying particular attention to them. So we hope that we can get some input on how we move this agenda forward. So we look forward to continue to work with the UK presidency, with UNEP, which is the implementing agency for this project, the IEA, as we heard now from Mary, and other leaders to accelerate global action for zero emissions and hopefully reach resilient and inclusive transport worldwide fairly soon. So I look forward for the conversation today, and over to you, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Gustavo, for those excellent opening remarks and for really setting the scene for our discussion today. I fully agree with everything you've said. 2/3 of all the greenhouse gases come from the way we generate, transport, and use energy, which is why action today is very much needed. And it's a great focus today on the transport sector. Zero-emission vehicles provide a great opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution, but for that, we really do need to see further progress, in particular when it comes to grid integration and battery technologies. It's my great pleasure now to turn to our special guest and keynote speaker, Mr. Nigel Topping. Nigel, it's great to have you with us. Thanks so much for taking the time. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Thanks, Gustavo. It's great to be with you. I'll start by congratulating UNEP, GEF, and IEA, and I know many other partners for what I think is a really important initiative, and for me really is emblematic of what I think many are seeing as the first COP that's primarily focused on implementation and accelerating implementation. So kudos to all of the collaborators. And is Rob de Jong here? He's in Nairobi. Well, Rob, I don't know if Rob is listening, but anyway, I want to thank Rob for the invitation to this event. Also, my time as high-level champion has completely coincided with the COVID, so there hasn't been much real travel. But thanks to Fiona and the UK consulate in Nairobi, we were able to find a tiny window and get out to Kenya earlier in the year. And one of the things which Rob organised was for me to participate in the launch of an e-motorbike pilot, initially aimed at the park rangers in Karura Forest in Kenya, who, by the way, if you're a park ranger, you need to sneak up on people doing bad stuff. So a silent e-motorbike is like a gift. They love them, right? But also the boda riders, people, drivers, people, motorbike taxis, people whose livelihood depends on. The UNEP work I think shows that the boda riders can significantly increase their income. So you've got more stability of livelihoods, as well as reduced emissions, as well as better air quality, with all the health implications we know about. So it was a lovely physical manifestation of of I think what you're talking about. And I think also a really good manifestation of something that I think is so important about this initiative is that we must avoid the lazy mental mistake of assuming that emerging and developing countries are going to do everything 10 years later than developed countries. I think, Kenya with M-Pesa, I mean, you still have better mobile money in the bush in Kenya than you do in Manhattan, right? So it's possible to leapfrog. And I think in an area where most of the growth is going to come from, it's really crucial, this work, to help locally, in a locally appropriate way for each country with different contexts, figure out the pathway that is going to work and is not going to wait 10 years. And actually, SLOCAT, who lead the Marrakesh Partnership work on mobility for us, are always reminding me, because I'm a bit obsessed about the death of the combustion engine, having worked in the automotive industry, but SLOCAT are always reminding me that any pathway must also pay real attention to mass transit, all forms of public transit, active mobility as well, so we don't just end up with a sort of techno transformation, but a more holistic one, with some of the great ideas coming out of the city leadership here of 15-minute cities and things like that. Today is a big day. And again, this COP is the first time that a presidency has said every day of the COP will have a real economy theme. And we find it's really helpful. Like if you're interested in transport, now you don't have to scour the halls for 2 weeks trying to find the transport events. You can come on Transport Day, and similar for the other themes. And I know, having already spoken to the Egyptian ministers, who most likely will be the president of the president designate next year, they see the value of that for all of us in organising. One thing I want to emphasise that this is my job defining the Paris Agreement is not to work with national governments, but to work with non-state actors. It's a terrible phrase, but it means cities, regions, businesses, investors, banks. And so just to give an idea of how much momentum there is behind this accelerated move to e-mobility and to clean forms of mobility, there are over 1,000 cities in the race to zero. Every one of those has a mayor who is motivated not just by getting emissions down, but by improving mobility for the citizens and improving the quality of the air. So I very much hope that mayors will be part of the community of practice. We have 260 state and regional governors who are taking the Under 2 coalition, which was founded 5 years ago when Under 2 was our North Star, to a net zero coalition. They represent half the world's GDP and a quarter of the world's population. I expect that to grow. And we have over 450 finance institutions who are all committed to getting to net zero. They don't all know how they're going to do it yet, but they're now all publicly committed to publishing plans and being held accountable to them. So there's a lot of momentum from other actors that you can plug into. As Gustavo referred to, I particularly appreciate the fact that you're focusing on low and middle income countries, so we don't have a kind of, I think sometimes we fall into the trap of a sort of managerial approach which says, let's look at the Pareto of countries by either GDP or population or emissions and focus on all the big ones because we get where's the biggest bang for the buck. But as you know, that ignores an awful lot of countries where the most vulnerable communities are already suffering, where the development needs are greatest, and where the needs of solidarity are greatest. So I'm thrilled to see that that's the focus in solidarity. You mentioned the small island states. I think we can really work so that small island states become the exemplars of complete transitions, because a small island state, like a city, has the potential to be a laboratory of accelerated change. RMI calculate that just in the Caribbean, if all the islands went to 90% renewables by 2030, they would save $24 billion. That's $24 billion of fiscal headroom that's then available for doing other things like investing in hurricane resilient infrastructure, etc. So this is not just about getting emissions down. It's an urgent developmental need because it's going to improve health, it's going to improve economies. So I'm very excited about this. Thank all the partners and encourage you to embrace the kind of multi-stakeholder nature of leadership in the regions you're working in. This is a big day for mobility. The next COP is going to be in Africa. So it's really exciting that you're launching this now, so that by the time we get to COP27, we can be sharing stories about that accelerated transition, what's working and what lessons we've learned. So I applaud you all and look forward to my next visit to Africa, and maybe I can get to try out an electric three-wheeler next time, having tried out the electric two-wheeler last time. And apologies, I have to dash, but thank you so much for inviting me.
No, certainly understand. Thank you. Thanks very much. Just to reinforce thanks to both Gustavo and Nigel. Really appreciate your opening remarks here. The focus on working with other stakeholders all around the world is obviously incredibly important and a big part of our focus on a people-centered transition here. So thank you so very much. We are now going to turn to a video as part of the GEF Global e-mobility program launch. A video has been prepared to summarize the objective, structure, and added value of this program to participating programs. So I would like participating countries, I'd like to ask colleagues to go ahead and start the video. Thank you.
The transport sector is the world's fastest growing emitter of greenhouse gases. It's responsible for almost 1/4 of global energy-related emissions every year. And with the global fleet set to double by 2050, this means urgent action is needed to reduce the transport sector's contribution to both climate change and air pollution. A global shift to zero-emissions electric mobility is part of the answer. As many developed countries are making this change, it's critical that low and middle-income countries are part of this transition. With more than 90% of the future vehicle growth projected to take place in these countries, we need to act now to make sure that low and middle-income countries are part of the e-mobility revolution. That's why UNEP and partners have developed a new global program to support the shift to electric mobility. Working at the national, regional, and global level, we're assisting more than 50 of these countries to introduce and expand electric mobility, which will lead to GHG emission reductions of 180 million tons of CO2 over the next 15 years. Low and middle income countries worldwide are supported with their transition to electric mobility through building capacity and creating awareness, establishing e-mobility roadmaps and strategies, developing national e-mobility policy frameworks, creating e-mobility business models and finance schemes, and by piloting electric vehicles on the ground. At the regional level, 4 support and investment platforms have been established to back transformation of the transport sector across countries and cities. Together, we're providing technical support and training, creating communities of practice to share lessons and best practices, and establishing marketplaces to mobilize financing and connect countries, cities, and e-mobility suppliers and financiers. The platforms are open to all countries and cities in each region interested in electric mobility projects. At the global level, the program will set targets for the shift to electric mobility. 4 thematic working groups on electric 2- and 3-wheelers, light-duty vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles, charging infrastructure, and batteries will provide support to the global community and countries, providing advice on e-mobility policies, standards and regulations, developing tools to support pilots, supporting e-mobility pilots with technical guidelines, data collection and reporting, and facilitating financing solutions. We know our goals are ambitious and can only be met in partnerships. That's why the Global Electric Mobility Program is a joint effort of international organizations, including UNEP, the International Energy Agency, the Asian Development Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and many others. The Global Electric Mobility Program is made possible by the support of the Global Environment Facility, the European Union, the FIA Foundation, and many other partners and donors who have mobilized over $70 million towards our mission. Learn more at unep.org/transport.
Well, thanks so much for that video presentation. I think it was very inspirational. I think you'd all have to agree, and wonderful to see the focus on emerging and developing countries and the wonderful partnerships that are bringing this all together. So I'd now like to turn to our panel discussion. I believe that we have two colleagues with us. If you would please come up to the stage, and I believe a couple who are joining us remotely. If we can get everyone connected. Great. So I'm pleased to welcome a distinguished panel to share with us their views on what the GEF Global E-Mobility Program brings in terms of great added value to the GEF program and what it may deliver to countries around the world. We have two country representatives here today, one from Sierra Leone, one from Chile, I think joining us remotely, and to share their views on how the program might be beneficial to their respective country activities. We also have an EBRD representative joining us, a large institutional investor and GEF partner with us, as well as Ampersand, a manufacturer of electric two-wheelers and operator of a battery swapping system from Rwanda. So I'd like to start with a question to each one of you. I'll start with Sheku Mark Kane, Director from the Environment Protection Service of Sierra Leone. Thank you very much for being with us. So the GEF-funded program to support Sierra Leone was endorsed only a few months ago, I understand. The project, which I believe is led by your agency, is focusing on electrifying tuk-tuks, if I'm not mistaken. Could you please share with us some of the details of the project and what are the biggest barriers to be addressed by the project to introduce electric mobility in Sierra Leone? Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll start by saying Sierra Leone is a very small country with a population of about 7.1 million, with a land area about 72,000 square kilometers. A country that is has been rated severely very high, highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. And therefore, we take climate change issues and its impact very seriously. We developed our initial nationally determined contribution back in 2016. And in that initial nationally determined contribution, we made a commitment to start to transition to a clean and green transport system. Because in doing our national circumstance analysis, we realized that transport sector was one of the major emitters in our country. So it was a great opportunity that we met UNEP, and having all the circumstances around us, we met them and we agreed to develop a proposal to transform to e-mobility. So this project has three components for us, as it is a pilot project to us. And we starting by seeing how we clear or remove the barriers that actually we enhance the rolling out of e-mobility and its promotion in our country. We want to see how we can do a preparation and scale up of and replicate the electric mobility system within our country, and in the long term, how we see that we can have an environmentally sustainable low-carbon electric mobility system in our country. We have planned this, and we got support from GEF through UNEP, but there are key barriers that are actually limiting us. One of which is that we are a country with a high level of people who are uneducated, who are illiterate, and therefore the awareness, the understanding of what it actually means by e-mobility and what it's important to our country is a great barrier. Currently, we lack the appropriate policy and regulatory environment that we actually encourage that we help shift from the current transport system that we are having to a green and clean transport system. We don't have the capacity as a country, institutional-wise, technical-wise, to actually see how we can roll out the technology better in terms of how to develop it, in terms of even the running of the technology. Even the electricity, the energy system is currently very poor. We have less than 20% of the entire country population with access to energy. So those are all limitations, and largely the financial capacity is also another barrier. But in all this, what we have done, or what we are trying to do, are to ensure that we are really able to roll out this project well. Currently, we review most of the environment and climate-related policies and acts as a country. And in it all, we are actually trying to see how we can make commitment to shift to environmental-friendly transport system. And we currently reviewed and updated our nationally determined contribution, in which we have made a commitment, a strong commitment, to reduce our carbon footprint, and in which we have said we are shifting a lot to a green and clean transport system. When we are on the preparation of the project concept itself, just through consultations, and there was already a project implemented by the World Bank on the resilience transport in the city. And it came to them that because they were supposed to provide buses in that project, it came to them that they should review the model of buses that they should buy. And negotiations are on board just by through the consultations of this project. Negotiations are on board that they should think strongly of getting electric buses instead of buying the normal buses. So through this project, what we're doing, we are piloting the most reasonable transport facility that we have in the country. Currently, the public transport system is very poor, and a lot of private players are actually engaged in transportation. And what is happening is that people go for the lower cost transport. That includes what we call the tuk-tuk, which we call keke locally, and that of the motor tricycles. We call them ukadas. So we have looked at the two transport facilities, or the fleet facilities that we have, and we realized that the keke will be a bit safe and reasonable, because it is covered, though with 3 wheels, but covered and can ride safer than the motor cycle. So we are piloting this project using the keke, and we see how we transform that into electric mobility and roll it out and see how it works. Because currently we have greater proportion of the population, more particularly within our urban communities, that highly rely on the keke as a major source of transportation. Just as an additional note, as a country, we face a lot of constraints with fuel, and a lot of hazards around it. Just a few days back, there was an accident that occurred with one of the trucks that carried the fuel the fire trucks, and we had over 115 deaths from the fire incident, and a lot of people were injured. So for us, this project is very, very much critical to us, more particularly from the environment and safety point of view, and rolling it out will be really great to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of that, Mr. Khan. I think you've outlined very well the challenges that countries such as Sierra Leone face in terms of resources and technology, and your access to electricity issue right there is a huge challenge. But huge congratulations to you for looking for solutions to address this mobility issue, which is obviously so important. And our condolences to those who've just passed away in this terrible accident. So we wish you certainly the very best and hope that facilities like this can be helpful. My next question is, if he's with us, for Mr. Francisco Javier Lopez. Yes, I see a thumbs up. Vice Minister, Ministry of Energy in Chile, who's actually joining us directly from Santiago. Chile is one of the leading countries in the world with regard to the use of electric buses. By now, about 800 e-buses are part of the Trans-Santiago City network. So the government of Chile also recently launched a new national electric mobility strategy. It was announced that only electric vehicles will be allowed to be sold by 2035. So the ambition is great there. Mr. Francisco Javier Lopez, Mr. Vice Minister, could you please tell us what concrete actions are planned in the new strategy, and how do you think the GEF-funded program can support your country to speed up this really important transformational process?
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Mary. I would like to start by thanking GEF for inviting us to be part of this side event in the COP26. Before answering your question, I would like to start by highlighting why we are advancing towards a sustainable transport. There's nothing new in that the energy sector is part of the problem that we are facing today of climate change, as most of the CO2 equivalent emissions came from this sector. However, in the same sector that will help us to tackle climate change and bring social and economic opportunities. The energy sector is leading Chile's decarbonization plan as we committed to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. To comply with this, Chile has set forth several complementary pathways that support the decarbonization of our economy, considering to clean our electricity generation capacity by increasing the amount of renewable energy. Our aim is to achieve 80% renewable generation before 2030. In 2019, it was 44%. The withdrawal of the coal-fired power plants by 2040, the promotion of energy efficiency mainly in construction, vehicles, appliances, and industrial equipment, the development of a green hydrogen industry, and to replace fossil fuels with electricity into the transport sector. Part of our decarbonization plan is based in the unique opportunity that Chile has, as we are a country rich in renewable energies, leading us to move to have more than 2,000 gigawatts in renewable electricity generation capacity, which is equal more than 80 times the current installed power capacity. This renewable energy will enable us to decarbonize key elements through electromobility, as around 20% of the emissions reduction, as we are expected to be reached in the promotion of electromobility in the transport sector. Recently, as you mentioned, we launched the National Electromobility Strategy, the objective of which was to outline the actions that Chile must take in order to short and medium term to accelerate the transitions to zero-emission vehicles and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. We're setting the goals set in our electromobility strategy for most of the subsectors in transportation, as follows: by 2035, 100% of the light and medium sales. New public transport vehicles, considering buses and taxis and heavy truck sales, including mining extraction trucks, will be zero emissions. By 2040, 100% of smaller truck sales in construction, agriculture, and forestry will be zero emissions. And by 2045, 100% of freight transport and intercity buses sales will be zero emissions. The new national electromobility strategy was developed through a participative process to include the perspective from the industry, academia, public institutions, and social society, which led us to concrete more than 50 concrete actions required to advance in electromobility within the next 4 to 5 years. In the first strategic angle of our strategy, under the means of sustainable transport and funding, we could highlight the work on efficiency standard for new vehicles implemented in the energy efficiency law, incentives and spurring adoption of electric vehicles in the long distance fleets, enable conversion of internal combustion vehicles to electric vehicles through regulation, which will be published soon on our digital platforms for public consultations. In the second strategic axle of our charging infrastructure and regulation, some of the actions are analysis of incentive in electricity price for a more efficient charging, implement regulation of interoperability of charging infrastructure which focus on the end users, establish parking lots of new buildings have the feasibility for the late installation of charging points. And in the third axle of the research and human capital, we have, for example, education on the labor profiles needed in electromobility while incentivizing new career profiles, and the promotion through our National Technological Institute, Center of the Acceleration of Electromobility, and the Chile Institute of Clean Technology. And in the fourth, last strategic axle of communication, dissemination, and collaborative, we can find, for example, fostering new equipment involving electromobility. We will continue to generate instances for coordination and collaboration through the public-private agreement for electromobility, and international collaboration will be maintained. Looking into a main objective of the Global Electric Mobility Program as a way to help developing countries in making transition to electromobility, deploying electric vehicles at a scale to improve air quality and have less dependence on fossil fuels. In Chile, we are in line, promoting programs and incentives that help us to reduce energy consumption in the transportation sector, which currently represents more than a third of the energy used in the country. In that sense, in Chile, we are promoting the electromobility in public transport, as the incorporation of more electric buses in Santiago and other regions, and a special program for the electric taxis, with a special program that finances part of the cost of migrating to electric. Moreover, we are accelerating the electromobility in commercial fleets through an incubator model, where we found the consultancy of integration electromobility into the business model of companies. The Global Electric Mobility Program will undoubtedly bring great benefits to continue accelerating the incorporation of electric vehicles in our country. The international experience and good practice will close gaps in the global suite towards zero-emission vehicle fleets to achieve our goals and climate commitments. We have set ambitious goals, but we are sure that with initiatives and programs such as GEF-7, we are accelerating electromobility not only at a central level, but through our country, bringing electromobility to all our people in Chile. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice Minister, for taking the time to join us all the way from Santiago. We really appreciate all that you have shared with us about the great progress that Chile is making in terms of e-mobility. This is a great example of not only setting vision and ambition, but really moving in a concerted way in terms of implementation and taking action to provide better mobility options for your citizens. I'd like now to, so thank you again. I'd like now to turn to our next panelist from the EBRD, which together with the UNEP, IEA, and the ADB is one of the executing agencies of the GEF program. So I'd like to introduce and welcome here remotely from London, I believe, Mr. Matthew Jordan Tank, Director of Sustainable Infrastructure Policy and Project Preparation. Thank you so much for being with us here today. The EBRD has financed transport projects over the last 30 years, and the bank is now committed to making 50% of investments in the green economy. EBRD is also leading one of the regional support and investment platforms under the GEF program. When talking to financiers, we often hear that there are plenty of project proposals, but only a few are really bankable. So can you please explain to us what is necessary to make an electric mobility project bankable? And how will the GEF program support the development of more bankable e-mobility projects? Mr. Jordan Tank, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. And let me first say how delighted we are to be a regional implementing partner for the GEF-supported platform for e-mobility. And to be here speaking at Transport Day at COP is a real privilege. So given the importance of decarbonizing transport, we wholly agree with everyone. This is the right focus at the right time. And so we'd sincerely like to thank GEF and all the partners here as we get underway and we work to implement this great program. So for EBRD, maybe a little bit of context briefly before I get into bankability aspects of e-mobility. I mean, firstly, I think the work for us in e-mobility builds on green cities, where we have a very established program of 52 cities and counting with green city action plans. And in fact, just a couple of hours ago, our board approved an extension for 2 million euros for that program. Now, within e-mobility, we're also have been active and we're looking to ramp this up now, and this is a great opportunity. So we have e-bus projects already approved and implemented in places like Batumi in Georgia, in Sofia in Bulgaria, in Tajikistan, in Dushanbe, and in Amman, Jordan. This is supported greatly by excellent donors like Taipei China, the GCF, and others. Looking forward, what's really fascinating is, and this leads me into the bankability aspects, we have a burgeoning pipeline. There's huge demand for this now, and including from the private sector. Private sector companies, innovative companies, ride-hailing companies for e-taxis, for electric scooters. They're coming to us now for charge point operators for infrastructure charging. They're all coming forward now because they're starting to see the viability of the business cases for this in our region. So let me talk about bankability and how we go about looking at this. I mean, first of all, a project to be able to attract investment and sustain that investment, it needs the proper policy environment. And previous speakers have spoken to this. Institutional planning, regulatory support mechanisms, fiscal and non-fiscal alike. We need a legal framework that underpins that contractual relationship between the private sector and the public sector, for example. And we need to really include the provisions for what would happen in the case of an early termination of a contract. What types of payments would need to be made to wrap up a contract? How would step-in rights work, as they're known for financiers? So all of these things are basic to project finance. And when we're talking about bankability, particularly with the private sector, these kinds of things need to be included. Now, turning to e-mobility, I think there are a few things that are very important to recognize. Firstly, we still face what I call a Capex burden. There's an upfront cost that still needs to be dealt with, not to mention the ongoing operational costs of any kind of e-mobility project. And right now, we still have this burden in front of us, and we have to think of ways and be able to find scalable means of overcoming this. So I think one aspect is really to think this through the prism of the total cost of ownership, TCO. So when you wrap everything together, the upfront and the full life cycle of the project, what is the actual comparison, taking into account all of the different aspects of an e-mobility project and service, comparing the e-mobility solution with the typical standard conventional approach. And we've done this kind of work in several of our countries, and it is interesting. It's quite different from country to country. So I think there's no one size fits all here. There's a lot of factors, such as the level of subsidy of diesel fuel, for example. When it's incredibly subsidized, it makes the total cost of ownership quite stark. So there's a regulatory policy action that can be taken, just to name one thing. The second major factor here is demand risk, and this is particularly pertinent and relevant for EV charging infrastructure. When there is very little penetration still of actual EV electric vehicles, whether they're individual cars or otherwise, in any given market. There's a demand risk for those who would venture into the area of infrastructure chargers, and so we need to be able to, in my view, allow the private sector, the so-called charging point operators, the CPOs in this industry, to determine the scale, the capacity, and the locational decisions of where those chargers should go. Government needs to allow them to bring that kind of business acumen and decisions that will be right-sized for the particular moment in time as EVs ramp up and penetrate into any given market. That's, I think, very important. So I'm very much in the camp of people in this industry who think about the public sector's role with regard to charging is particularly important in the planning aspect, the regulatory context, the standard setting, but allowing these private sector charge point operators to make those investment decisions, particularly on location and capacity, and being creative about what kind of contractual relationships they set up when they do install chargers, whether it's in cities or interurban settings. Now, let me also recognize that this is an incredibly innovative and interesting area right now because there's such a proliferation of offerings in the whole mobility as a service concept. And we're seeing if the mobility as a service operators have not yet moved to zero emission fleets, they're going to move to those. And we're seeing a big trend towards this. So we're, as I said, we're seeing interest in micro-mobility solutions for like e-scooters to high capacity e-bus systems, BRT systems. We're interested, and we think it's the right time to be looking at both public and private support mechanisms. And that's why I think this global electric mobility program is so well timed. And finally, let me just finish by saying, I think this is a slam dunk case for concessional climate finance for donors. I think what we need to do here is figure out scalable approaches to this, making it straightforward the way the donors would support these programs, focusing, in my view, on the TCO gap to determine and maximize the use of donor money, and then allocate it with simple metrics, simple approaches of measures and support products for both the public and the private sector. And I think if we do that, we can really take advantage of this huge opportunity that presents itself to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was really, really a very excellent and informative presentation. We really appreciate your taking the time to outline what the EBRD is doing in this area, your commitment to e-mobility, keeping a close eye on the trends, your emphasis of the role of the private sector, and very encouraging to hear your final comment about the important case here for concessional finance, which is so critical to moving the needle on some of these really important goals here. So it's a perfect segue, I think, to our next speaker. We're really pleased to have with us a representative from the private sector with us today, Mr. Josh Whale, founder and CEO of Ampersand. Ampersand is one of the first companies to build and use electric motorcycles in Africa, I understand, specifically in Rwanda. And I understand you just recently announced a fairly significant investment, so we're really looking forward to hearing about that. Would really welcome hearing a little bit about what Ampersand's business is all about, what your plans are for the future, and how the global this global program can support your activities as well. So thank you. The floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mary. Hi, everybody. My name's Josh Whale. So thank you so much to all the speakers who've gone before. I couldn't have framed all this better, and great to have such interest and vote of confidence in this. You know, this is still a very young sector, as you're all aware. We don't have a pavilion at COP like Sustainable Energy for All, but I hope that in Cairo there'll be a Sustainable Transport for All agenda. So we are Africa's first electric two-wheeler business. We've now had electric motorcycles on the road in the streets of Kigali for over 2 years, accumulated about 2 million kilometers. We've performed 50,000 battery swaps. which I'll get to in a moment. We've also recently raised, in this past year, we've raised $4 million in venture capital funding, including $3.5 million from Silicon Valley clean tech powerhouse firm Ecosystem Integrity Ventures. We also raised $500,000 from Total, which operates Africa's largest network of petrol stations, Total Energies, as they're now known, to their credit. The way it works, so drivers, our motorcycles cost less to buy, they cost less to operate, they cost less to power than conventional petrol motorcycles. We're competing directly with the 100 and 150cc motorcycles that are used all across sub-Saharan Africa. In particular, our focus is on East Africa. Our home is in Rwanda. Where we've been running these motorcycles now for the past couple of years. The way drivers interact with it is drivers can buy a motorcycle or they can acquire it through financing. We work with external asset financing partners who are a key piece of the puzzle, or they can buy it upfront with cash if they have the money. The drivers then can run using a battery swap. So these batteries will take them about 90 kilometers on a single charge with our new motorcycles, which we're building now. And then when they need to swap, they simply pull into a station. A swap takes about 2 minutes, so less than the time it takes to refuel. So we're solving by using a battery swapping solution, we're solving a couple of problems. The first problem being the upfront cost of the vehicle if you include the battery pack, and the second problem is recharging. So those who have the most to gain from e-mobility are those who are spending the most money on fuel. So one of our customers would typically spend about $1,700 a year on fuel, which is more than the cost of a new motorcycle. But those very same drivers are driving 12 hours a day. They do not have 2 hours, 3 hours at a time to wait and sit around recharging, especially if they have a passenger on the back. They're not going to be very popular. So that problem is also solved by our model. We're also now expanding into Kenya. We're currently building 500 motorcycles in Rwanda, of which about 100 will be heading to Kenya in the next few months. What we've certainly seen is it's taken time for the aid and development finance and venture capital infrastructure to catch up to e-mobility, which is fair enough. I mean, like I said, we were the first and bit of a lonely voice in the wilderness back when we first started in 2016. Now there are about 33, at last count, electric mobility startups operating just in the East African community alone. So things are changing rapidly, but there is still work to be done, and support from institutions like GEF will be really critical to that. One of the earlier speakers alluded to the capital need. Excuse me. One of the earlier speakers alluded to the capital need and the Capex infrastructure. So for us, we estimate a total capital need of around $3 billion USD to electrify all of the boda-bodas and motorbike taxis in the East African community. That's about 5 million motorbikes by 2030. That represents about half of the entire vehicle fleet of a region of about 180 million people. So I think that's a pretty good deal, and that's also debt and equity. So not simply grants, not simply handouts. You can extrapolate across East Africa, across the rest of the sub-Saharan Africa as well. I would estimate something like under 20 billion. To put that earlier $3 billion figure into context as well, these 5 million motorbike taxi and delivery drivers in the East African community spend each year about $8 billion buying fuel. So again, really low-hanging fruit, if you like, for a shift to clean mobility. And this is clean mobility. This is pushing past the tipping point in a mass market, the tipping point where the electric option just makes pure economic sense from day one. A vehicle that has more power, costs less to buy, costs less to operate, costs less to maintain. We have 7 7,200 drivers on our waiting list already in Rwanda and this was after a few weeks. The first 1,300 of those were completely unsolicited, pure word of mouth from the first 10 drivers we had on the road driving around in Kigali. So this is something that people want. This is not just forcing an intervention down people's throats as well. I think the final point I'd like to make just around the way that institutions like GEF can be structured is this is happening, right? This is already underway. It's happening organically. The government of Rwanda has already passed a series of policy incentives, reducing the electricity tariff for all electric vehicles, reducing the VAT on charging services. And we've worked very closely with the government of Rwanda over these past years, so full credit goes to them. However, we are operating under a tight timeline if we want to get on top of this thing and set Africa on the right course to tackle climate change at the speed and scale that it needs to be done. So we need partners and we need funding that is nimble. We cannot wait a year and a half for grants to come through and be approved, unless they're $3 billion, and that's fine. But what I would encourage is taking a much more of a portfolio approach if you wish to work with companies like ours, startups like ours, particularly if you want to have that be an equitable transition. I was fortunate enough that I have a very understanding and loving wife who was able to support us financially, but I'm a middle-class white kid from New Zealand. Most young African entrepreneurs do not have the financial wherewithal to make that call. So if you want to level the playing field, understand that a year to wait for a grant is a year without salary for many people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Josh. It's such a great story and really inspiring as well. And it just shows that with real determination, just how much opportunity there is, and making a huge difference in a really important area. And I really appreciate your underlying the urgency of the challenge and the affordability aspect of it as well, which is so important as we think about creating new solutions for people all around the world in areas that really, really matter to their economies and their future. So hope you find some great partnerships here in the near term going forward. Thank you. I know we're coming to the end of our event here. I'm sorry we don't have time for questions at this point. I'm going to turn to our closing speaker in just 1 second, but I just want to say it's been a real pleasure to have all the participants, speakers with us today to discuss this really important topic. Just 3 quick points. The transition to zero emission vehicles will be absolutely crucial for us to reach Paris Agreement goals, and governments absolutely need to set the right framework conditions to accelerate the shift to e-mobility. Second, so pleased to see the focus here on low and middle income countries, creating opportunities for citizens across these countries. Third, the GEF-funded Global E-Mobility Program, which we're launching here today, really is a fantastic opportunity and initiative, way for us to all come together to accelerate the pace. So without further ado, one last highlight, I would like to turn the floor over to Ms. Inger Andersen, Executive Director of UNEP. We're really pleased and fortunate to have you with us today for concluding remarks. On behalf of all my colleagues at the IEA, I'd really like to express our deep appreciation for the fantastic work that UNEP has been doing in leading the coordination of this program. Really look forward to working with you over the next few years and supporting governments with their shifts to electromobility. So with that, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And I was really fortunate to be able to listen to a number of the interventions. I'm sorry I missed some, but like everyone else, we're running around. Huge thanks to the GEF and to all the partners that are involved. This is a moment and a sort of movement whose time has come. Look, in the 1770s, someone came up with a great idea of the steam engine, and it dominated the 1800s. In the late 1800s, someone came up with a great idea of an internal combustion engine, and it dominated the 1900s. And here we are in the 1990s, the first modern electric vehicles began to be constructed, and we need to accelerate that domination that we know will come, right? It's a given, but we don't have time to sort of make it happen by just normal progress like we saw these other transitions. We need to urge it on because exactly of the footprint, the carbon footprint that the mobility sector has. And we also understand, of course, that the expansion will be largely in low and middle income countries, the expansion in transport sector. And so we're faced with a choice. Do we leapfrog over that polluting age and straight to the smart e-mobility age? The answer is absolutely. And that means that we need to take some shifts. And it's great that the Global Environment Facility is flying this flag. And it is wonderful to hear about country leadership, about entrepreneurial investments that are really making this happen. And we are seeing commitments already, right? The UK has said that no more fossil fuel cars, and let's call them that, fossil fuels cars, will be sold from 2030 onwards. Chile has just announced 2035 onwards, and others are coming in. I have the great privilege of living in Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya, our headquarters of the United Nations Environment Program. We are aware of your program, and we know how important it is, but we also get that it matters to step up and support governments with the regulatory setting, with ensuring that they get the kind of support on both the legal and the legislative and the regulatory and other incentives that can allow for that shift. So we at UNEP, as well as the broader UN, we're actually having internal discussions. Can we, the UN itself, be part of shifting that market because we have considerable vehicular footprint? And we believe that we can. So obviously I can't control all the UN agencies, but we can begin to make that. And that's a conversation we are having, which we are quite excited about. We get that it is about policies. We get it is about financing. We get that it is about mobilizing public-private partnerships, and very much about having the infrastructure. Many times when I speak to folks in Kenya, they say, yeah, but the distance, etc. But how many times do you drive 300 kilometers, 400 kilometers, 500 kilometers in a stretch? The answer is most trips are picking up the school, picking up the kids and buying the groceries. These are not long trips. And even we are seeing that the stretch of the vehicles can get longer and longer. As technology get better, and certainly two-wheelers. We have no business being fossil fuel two-wheelers anymore. We need to enable that market. So a huge thanks to everyone who's here and online. Thanks to everybody who has come. And this is a movement that we just got to make happen. Put our foot on the accelerator or on the non-gas so that we can expedite this movement. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Anderson. That was a perfect conclusion and a really inspirational ending to this important discussion today, and really look forward to partnerships continuing to grow to really move the needle on this. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us and to our speakers today. Thanks.